very much in the public interest, especially with respect to housing, for rural land subdivision conditions to be changed, but land area alone is a poor criterion. As a past owner of rural land, I know rural land's value depends on its growing potential. So contour, sun aspect, access, wind shelter are all critical factors. In my opinion, it should be subdivided on the basis of these considerations down to 1 acre and half an acre as discretionary use. The present 40-hectare limit pushes up land and rent prices. It is hard to see any way it is in the public interest. In the 1980s, 10 acres or 4 hectares was considered big enough for an economic farming unit. I think it very likely the district plan review process was captured by city property owners who understand the planning law and wanted exactly that outcome because scarcity increases the value of their property. Now, I just want to add another thing to that, which again, it's planning, but the distinction between planning and infrastructure is so artificial that I think it's important to just add this to what I've already put in my original written submission, which was purely more focused on infrastructure and drainage. The definition of rural residential purposes is pretty passé and it's pretty artificial. There's a lot of people doing food resilience on very small pieces of land, and I think you've already got a food resilience person at ECC. So growing food within the city and land that's presently zoned residential is very important. So that again is another reason why the distinction between rural and residential needs to be revised. And there's also a lot of rural properties, small rural properties, are used for homestays and visitor accommodation. And there's always been an argument that that's not a rural use, but there's no actual reason if it's of economic benefit to the city to make it impossible. But I agree that you don't want rich residential, which was lifestyle blocks. You have to preserve good growing land. So that is really planning, but it's all one lump, okay? It's all related. And the reason I wanted to make the submission is because I've seen what happens when there's housing pressure on, and people sometimes put in illegal extra accommodation sleep huts, or they've got it legal, but they're not allowed water, and they put it on anyway. Or the worst thing, and I've given you some links where this has happened, where councils have done it, and the drainage assessments of the property has all been separate lots, and the overall picture hasn't been looked at. So I'm sure you're aware of these, but I just am really concerned that the Dunedin City Council, being very worried about housing affordability and lack of housing, I hope you don't all rush in and do what I think Auckland has done. And okay, I'll stop there. I think you get the picture. I think there might be a sort of a stop. Thank you, Councillor O'Malley.
Oh, well done. Well inside your time. I've just got one quick question. You are aware that there is public consultation coming through with variation to the district plan and to the written submission that you put in earlier on in the day around Three Waters infrastructure, that those will be considered under those as that moves forward, those hearings?
No, it wasn't. I find it hard enough to keep up with plan review, let alone with the variations. So no, I'm not up to play with the variation of the district plan. In the past, I've been cynical about them, Councillor O'Malley, because often they've been for the benefit of developers. So I'm not quite even sure why you have got a variation to the plan at the moment. I'm not up to date with it, unless it's the modifications of the Resource Management Act. I don't know.
It's to respond to the change in status of the city's growth rate and our supply of urban supply of land.
So it's a variation initiated by the council
in response to the central government.
Ah, right. Okay. Well, okay. Thank you for letting me know. It means I have a further opportunity for submission if I can get round to it. Thank you.
Very good. Does anybody have any questions of Diane?
Yeah, hands on the side.
Councillor Elder does.
Hi Diane, thanks for your submission. I found it really interesting. So you see the potential of having drainage systems put into wastewater and like systems put into subdivisions to enable them to happen?
Not really talking about subdivisions. I'm talking about infill. So I'm
Yeah.
talking about, okay, so infill's different. I'm sure that I have reasonable confidence that the council will manage any new subdivisions with very careful consideration of drainage implications. It's existing subdivision with infill
Yeah.
that I'm worried about.
Yeah, yeah, because capacity would not continue to allow it to happen, or would be stretched.
The capacity might be overwhelmed already.
Yeah.
The issue of piped and unpiped watercourses in private ownership, and
Yeah.
the issue of records being incomplete means that some people just don't even know what's there.
Yeah,
and neither does the
I
council
agree.
sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, no, it sounds like an idea worth considering, actually. And I note that on the hill suburbs, it could be an option. Oh, sorry. It could be an option for helping stop the drainage off the hills onto the flats.
Actually,
So,
that's a very good point, Councillor. I never thought of it. I've thought of rainwater holding tanks that stops the water rushing, stormwater holding tanks that stops the water rushing down the hill as being a fix for present problems. But I never thought of a package plant of being a fix for present problems as well as a new thing. So yes, I agree with you.
thank you.
Good. I have Councillor Hall, Councillor Vandervis and Councillor Houlihan. So Councillor Hall.
No, I didn't put my hand up. I put it up earlier.
Okay. Councillor Vandervis.
Just wondering, Diane, specifically what parts of the second generation plan do you think need changing to help with the issues that you raise?
Councillor Vandervis, I can't understand the district plan review. I don't think anybody except the planners understand it in its entirety, and I think you have to look at it by computer. And I think the way that it's set up is it's a reference document. So if you have a specific question about a specific site and locality, then you might be able to look that particular aspect up or get planners help to do it. But to understand the principles of the document, I think it's beyond most people. I looked at it when it came out, and it seemed to me there was one fundamental question, like to get the philosophy behind it, one fundamental question: does the city go up or out? That's the most fundamental planning question. So do you extend outwards or do you go up? It looks to me like this plan says go up, become more dense. And I think that's wrong. I think as far as the philosophy is concerned, you should do both. But you must keep open spaces in the city, or your city will become, amenity values will become terrible. So the plan is a big problem. I don't understand it, and I don't think most people here understand that fundamental question. Do we increase density, or do we extend outwards? And I don't think anybody's really been asked that. I mean, they were sort of asked and sort of embedded in the plan review, but I don't think it was clear to them. It's very complicated.
You suggested that the 40 hectare size that the second generation plan has increased in order to be able to build a residence. You suggested that has not been appropriate. It used to be 15 hectares, it's now 40. But you've also suggested that just looking at size of property isn't enough either. Are you suggesting that we need to go to allow smaller lots, but only in specific areas that are not, for instance, useful for intensive farming?
I think the whole concept of land use needs to be reevaluated. Like I've been observing local government right back to the Town and Country Planning Act, where you had sort of zones for activities, and it was all very clear cut. And then I remember when the Resource Management came in. So there was this idea that with the Resource Management Act, you could do anything on any land as long as you could mitigate any adverse effects. And yet we still have this carryover from the Town and Country Planning Act of specific zones, commercial, industrial, residential. And it's completely stupid. We should use land however it's most appropriate. So that's something that you have to do a big think tank about, but it's already happening to some extent with urban resilience and urban farming, like Curtis Stone in the States. He's hiring residential land off residential landowners, and his farming operation is basically in people's backyards. So, you know, land use needs to be looked at.
Point of order,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Benson, point of order.
Well, much and all is, I've got no issue with much of what's said in the submission. This is turning into a debate about a public process, which is still partly under appeal, and a process which people may or may not have engaged in.
Councillor O'Malley, is Councillor Benson Pope asking me a question?
I know he's making a point of order, Diane, so
Right,
he needs to
okay.
make his point of order.
So he's addressing a point of order to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I'm suggesting, Mr. Chairman, is that in terms of standing orders, this conversation is no longer relevant to this meeting, or indeed the submission that was originally made. It needs to go somewhere else, or it should be ruled out of order.
Councillor O'Malley, I'm probably not allowed to make a point of order, but I don't believe there's any process to rule a submission out of order.
I think in the interest of natural justice, we'll just try to keep the time on this short, but acknowledge that the district plan is already lodged. So revisiting the district plan is not really of any point, and there is some public process to be followed, which I don't want to interfere with that public process. So I would ask people, especially councillors, to be careful of any questions they say, make sure it doesn't interfere with the correct process. And I think we've noted Ms. Yeldon's public forum submission, and I still see Councillor Houlihan's hand up, so I'll let her ask a question, but then I think if we can wrap it up from there, we could.
Are you going to rule on the point of order?
I will say that I would rule the point of order down, and let's keep going forward and just finish this off, please. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley. I just had a question. Joanne, do you have concerns about if we move and grow the city, that there might be a lack of arable land? Is that one of your concerns?
Just before you answer that, understand that there's still a process going down here for the district plan, and we've got to be very careful we don't start having a discussion outside the wrong room over something that needs to go to another forum, which was Councillor Benson Pope's point.
Okay, so do you want to give us a list of what we can't talk about? Because I'm a new councillor, I have no idea what we shouldn't.
Well, this is the Infrastructure Services Committee. This is not really the right committee for discussing things around planning and the environment, which is the committee that is on Thursday. So we are, as Councillor Benson Pope suggested, not in the correct forum to be having this discussion.
Councillor O'Malley, I could answer that question in terms of the status quo, because I'm satisfied with the status quo in a manner which would not threaten the district plan as it stands, and answer Councillor Houlihan's question. Basically, it's a matter of national importance that land's high quality soils are preserved already. It's a matter of national importance in the Resource Management Act. So high quality soils for growing food must be preserved.
Thank you. I think that's it for questions. Thank you, Diane. And if now that we've finished public forum, I'll move on to apologies. I've got two apologies, one from Councillor Lord for early departure and one from Councillor Staines, who may be an early departure.
Excuse me, Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Staines is now an apology for lateness.
Oh, he's now an apology for lateness. Okay.
To be here shortly.
Do we have to move to accept those apologies?
Yes.
I move that we accept those apologies. Seconded, Councillor Elder. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. On to confirmation of the agenda. I don't see any changes to the agenda, so I move that we confirm the agenda without addition or alteration. Seconder, Councillor Barker. All those in favour? Carried. Declarations of interest. I have received an email from Councillor Lefiso advertising that she has updated her registry to state that she is no longer Secretary of the Arahi Te Uru Marae Council. Does anybody else have any updates they want to make to their registry?
Councillor O'Malley, this is in relation to item 7. I'll be sitting back from that particular item.
Very good. Councillor Hawkins, your worship, do you?
Yeah, I just noticed that I'm no longer the co-chair of, well, oddly, I still qualify as a young elected member. I'm no longer the co-chair of the Young Elected Members Committee with Local Government New Zealand, if that could be removed. Thank you.
Very good. So I'll make sure that Ms Adamson updates that. So therefore I move that the committee amends the elected members' interest register and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members. Do I have a second? Councillor Walker. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Now on to Part A reports. Item 5, the DCC submission to accessible streets. Janine Benson and Simone Hangwick will be presenting. Janine. Very good.
Sorry, Councillor, I'm just having some technical difficulties.
That's fine. Here you are. Do you want to speak to the report in any way?
Have we got Stacey with us as well, Councillor?
Just Simone, but I don't see her.
Simone.
Oh, down there, yep.
Yeah, so this is essentially our submission on accessible streets, which talks, excuse me, a little bit around footpath policy, a lot around, the protocols around spacing, responses around e-scooters. What I guess I might point out about it is we still retain some control in terms of what we can do. So I guess, Simone, have you?
I'm here, yeah.
Yes, you are. Hi. You want to give a bit of a broader overview?
Yes, sure. So this is a rule change proposal to classify different types of vehicles into transport devices that are powered and unpowered, and just to clarify what categories they fall into. The rule change is also proposed to allow cyclists and scooters on the footpath with a speed limit. We suggest that it shouldn't be just any cyclist, but there should be an age limit. So we're suggesting it should be 16 years or younger. And also there's a whole lot of rule changes proposed. So also parking on berms. So it's suggested that currently there needs to be signs where parking on berms is not allowed, and they're suggesting that should be removed. There should be an online register, but we are suggesting that there should be signs when parking is allowed on berms. There's rules around, or proposed rules around more priority for people on bikes or on foot when traveling straight ahead through an intersection, to have priority over left turning traffic that is on the traffic lane, but also on separated path or on cycle lanes, so that with some safety measures in place and some road markings in place. So it's quite a lot of different rules proposed, and they are essentially to give more safety and accessibility to active modes, walking and cycling, but also to account for new emerging technologies like e-scooters, and who knows what else is going to come in the future. Also to give some more priority to buses pulling out of bus stops. So they would have priority, and the cars would have to wait for buses indicating and want to leave bus stops.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
I've got a number of people wanting to ask questions. Councillor Hall.
No, all I was saying, I was going to sit back on an item, that was all.
Oh, okay. Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And kia ora koroa, thank you for the report. I have 3 questions. One is around consistency. At one stage, it supports consistency around rules for, particularly for e-scooter companies, to try and mitigate the risk of lobbying of various councils to set rules to suit their company. But then later in the submission, it makes a couple of points around it's better for road controlling authorities to have the flexibility to arrange situations in a way that suit them, including whether or not scooters can use cycle lanes, various other bits and pieces. And I'm just trying to reconcile that at a philosophical level. Surely we would either be supportive of having flexibility in general or being immune to lobbying in general.
I think that was around local, like councils still having the possibility to restrict e-scooters, for example, on certain roads. So if there was like a blanket rule, let's say they would be allowed on all roads, but we wouldn't want them on George Street or other footpath. So we could make that we could decide that. And
yeah. One very specific question about bus stops, and the submission is supportive of allowing priority or giving priority to buses pulling out of bus stops on roads that are 60 kilometers an hour or slower. Do we have bus stops on the network in areas that are 60 kilometers an hour or higher? And if so, is there a reason why the same priority wouldn't be afforded to users of those stops?
Not quite sure if we have bus stops on roads with that go faster than 60, but the reason is that to give enough time for cars to stop for buses pulling out. So if they were going faster than 60 and they would see a bus indicating, they might not have enough time to stop, or it wouldn't be safe to stop to let the bus go first.
Okay. And just finally, it talks in the submission about how we consult with pedestrian groups, vulnerable users, disability support services, those sorts of things when we are making decisions around what we do with our transport network. But in the summary of considerations, it doesn't appear that we engaged with any of those groups in terms of forming the basis of our policy submission here. So particularly around the pedestrian use of the footpath and pedestrian space, was there any engagement with CCS Disability Action or People First or the DPA, those groups that we would usually check in with when we were doing a bylaw review or similar?
I'm not aware of that. But there was I think there was a survey on the use of Lime scooters in Dunedin, and some of the information, the outcomes informed the submission, but I myself wasn't involved in that, so I'm not quite sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elder.
Thank you for the work on that submission. I've just got a number of questions, actually. My first question was around on page 26, and the age on the footpath. My observation is that there's a lot of people who don't feel safe on the road, and a lot of them are over 16 and they are going on wider footpaths. And I was just wondering what the rationale was to limiting it to under 16, given that there's a rule around only being able to go 10 k's an hour. It seems limiting.
Mm. And you, we
Fortunately, you're breaking up, Simone. No way to get come.
It's not working.
Unfortunately, Simone, your mic's not working at all.
Or your video.
Or maybe if you turn your video off, your bandwidth might be a bit.
The thing is, there is opportunity to change that within the flexibility of the rules.
It's not working.
The host can turn her video off. Whoever's got the host for this meeting, they can turn her video off.
I'm just about to. I find it. I'll shut it.
No, she's down here. It's Simone, I saw Janine there. That's there. Keep going down.
Wait, Simon.
Oh, I tell you what. Maybe if Janine answers that, because I think.
Yeah, I know there's the flexibility of the submission means that you can change it anyway, but I know a lot of people with disabilities or who aren't confident on a bike because they're not they are a little bit older or whatever, use the footpath and they go slow.
Okay, I'll let Janine answer that.
I'm not sure, to be honest with you, Councillor, that I can answer it, but I will follow that up.
Yeah, it's just thought. The other thing is, I used to drive the buses, and I just about took a cyclist out. It was the most scariest thing I've ever done, and the reason was they were going probably about 40 or 50 k's an hour, and they were on the inside of me, passing me on the inside. So it says, allow cycles and transport devices to carefully pass slow-moving vehicles on the left, unless the vehicle was indicating a left turn. Well, I was driving the bus. I had to dash in and get a passenger and indicated, but he was halfway along the bus and I didn't see him. Yeah. And he was lucky he wasn't taken out. It was the most scary thing. And one of my thoughts was, is there any thought given to bicycles having lights during the day, just like scooters? Because if that person had a flashing white light, I would have seen him. He was lucky not to be badly injured.
I certainly think that was kind of not questioned in the report, but it may be worth following up. Yeah.
And I mean, in the case of the accident at the university bookshop, again, if that person had a flashing white light, it can be seen by peripheral vision really fast. And so I would like for it to be considered that bikes, like e-scooters, need to have a light on during the day for safety. It's just like having a bell should be compulsory for safety. So that was just a thought I had around that. And having driven the buses, I totally agree that buses need to be given priority when pulling out of a bus stop. There's huge amount of time pressure on bus drivers, and once they get behind, it gets worse. And so, yeah, I fully support that buses should have priority when pulling out. Definitely. So,
a question.
Yeah. What? How do you phrase that? Yeah. So that's all my comments. Sorry.
Okay. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I had two questions. The first one was Did you find the statement in number 7 on page 23, was it 3 negatives, somewhat confusing? I have worked out what it means, but I did wonder if that posed the need to restate it, really. Seldom that you find 3 negatives in one statement. 2's bad enough.
Engineers like to confuse things, councillors, make themselves seem more clever.
I'm sure that the staff worked out what that meant. So my other question is really around, was there anything left out in the proposal of the rule changes that you thought was blaringly omitted?
Based on my pretty limited understanding of the subject matter, I thought it seemed fairly extensive. Just reading through it. So I'd say no to that, no.
Thank you.
Councillor, the main context that this was driven from was when the scooters were introduced into the New Zealand market, our laws didn't facilitate easy transitioning for them. So this is driven by trying to create a framework where we can allow these kind of low-powered devices to be used safely in a more kind of structured manner. So that's the context from which it's been started.
So my question's probably around, I mean, you don't know what you don't know, but it's trying to cover all the possibilities, is it not? And I guess I was really asking, do you believe it's done that in terms of the proposal?
Yeah, mostly around the low-powered stuff. I take Councillor Elder's point that you know, adding lights to cycling will increase safety, and it is a safety and accessibility thing. So that sort of seems to be the only gap that I've been able to see.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Wiley, your hand's down again. Councillor Hall.
Did I hear right before when they said for pedestrians and scooters going straight ahead on a road, the left turning vehicle has to give way to them?
No, I believe what it was that you may overtake on the left if the vehicle is going slow. It's not that they have to yield, but that you could overtake on the left if that vehicle was moving slowly.
Yeah, but that might be all right for a motor car, but you get a 23-metre long truck and trailer unit, you're just a recipe for a disaster. It's like the one-way street system. Everybody wanted the cycleway put on the left-hand side where the truck driver can't see it. And in the end, sensibility ruled, and we put all the cycleways on the right-hand sides the truck drivers can actually see. And now we're saying we want you to pass the truck and trailer unit on the left-hand side. Well, recipe for a disaster.
I'll capture that when I get some comments. Councillor Elder, Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Simone and Janine. Thank you for the submission. It's an area of interest for me. And sorry, just going back to His Worship's question, just be aware that there are bus stops on the state highway leading out to Port Chalmers that are 80 kilometres an hour. Anyway, I have a couple of questions around page 31. It's when we talk about the bells and the alert devices. Is there any reason why we can't be the language can't be a little bit stronger around this, but perhaps using language such as mandatory? And the reason I ask that question is, I mean, I'm a daily cyclist, and alert devices and bells are just of paramount importance. So is there any reason to just not why we haven't made that point a little bit more, add a bit more strength to it? That's the first question. Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to ask my second question?
Yeah, I'm just not sure how whether, Simon, could you make it mandatory for a cyclist to have, you know, those kind of mandatory things that we have in a vehicle?
Yeah, I guess the challenge will be enforcement, but yeah, we're happy to make that statement stronger if council wish. I mean, it is, as you say, good practice, but would be difficult to implement and enforce.
Yeah,
Okay,
we can certainly make that a little bit stronger in the submission.
Good. That would be great. And the second question alludes to page 34. And we've got quite a list here of lighting and safety requirements. My question is really around. I mean, there's not a huge body of evidence internationally, but there are some great studies of Denmark and Australia actually. So in the first box, when you're asked the reason for your rating around having the use of light, you just say this should be safer. I mean, this is really, really critical. And those studies I allude to in Denmark in 2013 and 2017 are unequivocal in the study results. So I would just like to, is there any reason why we can't have an expansion on this should be safer? And I'm happy to pass some of that study information on to you. I just think, reason not. So I'm trying to keep this to questions. And the final point there in box 39, again, the question is, are you not aware of the fact that the university is an accident waiting to happen around this particular issue? So again, I just think we could be a bit stronger here on, or do you not think we could be a bit stronger here on making it a requirement rather than a recommendation? Because this is, again, out of those studies, this is the point that is highlighted as the most critical.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's, that's coming through as a theme. So I think we may need to make it a bit stronger.
Cool. And I'm happy to help or give input. Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Councillor Elder.
Is there any much in this to do with actual signage on streets to tell people where to go and where they should be on the footpath? Because I note in a lot of work, again, overseas in Australia, etc., paths have signs to help people know where they are on the footpath. Is there?
So it doesn't go into a lot of detail about signage,
no.
to be fair with you. I think just taking Simon's point, it was really about, the emerging changes of different modes of transport and how they behave with one another. But take your point about signage.
It's likely to be an outcome, Councillor, so consulting at the moment on how to classify and where it is appropriate for scooters to go versus cyclists versus pedestrians. And once they've kind of worked through all that feedback, there'll be some clearer guidance coming from Ministry of Transport and NZTA on where these devices are best placed, and signage might be part of that guidance.
Following on from Steve about safety, it is mandatory for e-scooters to have lights and reflectors, and so is there a possibility therefore that given e-scooters have to have lights and scooters, and that's mandatory, that bikes when they're sold should be having a bell, a front light and a rear light, so that they provide safety for the rider? Do you think that would be possible?
I do think it would be possible.
The other thing is, when you're encouraging people to ride, which we're wanting to do, we're wanting people to take active transport, a lot of people when they buy a bike actually don't know how to bike on a footpath or the road. Would it be possible, therefore, to require it to be mandatory when people sell a bike to have a bike code instead of a road code for bikes? Because a lot of people just don't know. Would that be possible to suggest?
Can I just remind councillors that on the 16th of April, this was sent out for us to put comment on.
Well, I did actually I put forward that proposal at the time.
Written, because
Yes,
Ms. Sargent didn't seem to be aware of that. Okay, thank you.
It's certainly something that we can add to the feedback.
Yeah, it's just this is about safety and accessibility, and if we're going to do this, I think we should do it well.
Councillor Oda, you finished your questions?
Yeah.
Councillor Fiso.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to Ms. Benson and your team for the submission. And I do take the chairperson's reminder about the submission already being sent out to us. And forgive me, sorry, I may have missed His Worship's questions, which I was changing devices. So I just have a very quick question. I'm referring to page 29 of the order paper, proposal 2B, default 15 kilometers per hour speed limit. And I acknowledge that you're suggesting a reduction to 10 kilometers. Would there be any sensible, I don't know, case to argue for 5 kilometers per hour on the footpaths?
I think that was the point really around having to look at each location on its merit, and I think that was probably why we didn't say we just agree with a standardised approach across the country.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a follow-up question, really to Mayor Hawkins' question about the voice of the disability community. And on reflection, I really want reassurance that they have been consulted and have got their views expressed in this, because we have made a commitment to them many times over and been asked by them as recently as the annual plan hearings reminded about this. And we have fallen short in the past from time to time, but it's really important that their views, that whatever we're submitting is consistent with their views and that they have a strong voice. So is it possible to ensure that at this point, Ms. Benson?
Yes, I'll follow that up.
Thank you so much.
No, it's the end of
Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that's a perfect segue as we're going to get. It concerns me from a process point of view that I'm now not entirely clear what it is that we're discussing. We've had a number of questions from councillors asking whether language can be strengthened here, or whether context and research can be added here or now, whether mandatory bike training could be added as a suggestion. And the response each time has been, yes, we could. But I don't know if that's necessarily how you go about amending a submission. So at this point, I don't know what it is that we're discussing, because it's unclear to me what support there is for the various suggestions that have been made in this forum.
Yeah, I note that. The submission date is the 20th, so that's 8 days away. Would there be an appetite for us to revisit this, or do we want to approve the submission as it stands right now? I might. Do you want to sit and think about this for a minute? I don't want to rush this thing through, because there has been a number of comments made right now, which indicates to me that some people didn't, for some reason, whatever reason or another, this didn't get back to the transport team in time to make the submission to the extent to which people are necessarily happy.
resolution or to work with you, and then you approve it.
Yeah, I'm just might adjourn for 2 minutes to write something, but my idea is that we're going to suggest that we would let this lay on the table and try to get something in time for the submission date, after we've heard back from council one more time, and we'll write basically something like that.
If I might be,
Your worship, yeah.
I would prefer that we got, I mean, these are contentious issues, and I would prefer there to be, for this to be debated and signed off in public. And the formal way of doing that is if people wanted to make amendments that hadn't been incorporated for whatever reason, then they can be moved as amendments to the submission.
So we put this submission in as it stands and then do amendments to it afterwards?
No, people can suggest amendments to the submission and as it is in draft.
Very good.
Those have been incorporated or not, we can approve the submission in its entirety.
Can they send those to Lynn Adamson potentially, those amendments, so we can capture them in a written form? Oh, I'm waiting on your worship to see, seeking really your opinion on that.
Yes. I don't know how you want to manage it.
Some of these comments have been relatively substantive, so I mean it'll be a fairly large set of amendments at the end. Versus we've got 8 days to do a submission. But I don't know, as you point out, it would end up being one of these situations again where we would be retroactively accepting it if we modified it now. Can I just seek a little bit of advice and adjourn the meeting for 2 minutes? I'd like to move to adjourn for 2 minutes. Second, Councillor Fiso, all those in favour? We're back in 2 minutes.
Thank you. So
again. After having talked to staff and got advice, we are going to lay this on the table.
Councillor Lord needs to move.
Councillor Lord will need to move it though, because we need to have someone who hasn't spoken. So I guess, does he need to give the language?
Yep.
So Councillor Lord, can I put you on the mic and you give the language for this, please?
Yep, absolutely. I'd just like to move that we leave it to lie on the table and get it sorted, and people can make their submission.
At the planning and environment meeting in 2 days.
On Thursday. And I also just comment that this shouldn't have to happen like this stuff when they send out these submissions. We should be sorting it out. If we've got an opinion, we should get back to them.
Do we need a seconder? We need a seconder. I think someone who hasn't spoken, Councillor Radich hasn't spoken. So you can second it. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Vandervis is against, carried. Moving on to the next item.
Just before you do, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Vandervis.
Sorry, it's procedural, so it had to be put straight away. I appreciate that. But if we're going to revisit it on Thursday, can the Chief Executive or Ms. Graham perhaps suggest a process for people to provide input, unless I missed that, so that what we get on Thursday, people have been able to traverse a bit more fully?
I think I'll let Mr. Drew answer that.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Thank you, Councillor. So we'll, I've taken a whole lot of notes here, and staff are watching, and I've taken some notes. We'll also email the submission back out to councillors. So if there's any more feedback that hasn't been raised at the meeting that you would like incorporated into the submission, if you get that to staff, but we'll send it out today with a prompt for additional feedback. We'll incorporate that in the next day or so, and then deliver the paper as a supplementary to the PME committee with all of that feedback, including today's, consolidated into updated submission, which will cover all of your comments that made today and via email.
Excellent, thank you.
Very good, and that's been passed. So we'll move on to the next item, item number 6, naming of new roads and private ways. Ms. Benson and Ms. Sargent. Do you want to speak to this, Tam?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just some opening remarks. So this is a bit of an omnibus report for 10 road names in Dunedin. We've streamlined the reporting structure to support council decision making around naming roads in Dunedin. As you said, there's 10 roads. 3 of these are public roads and 7 are right of ways. In the growth environment that Dunedin has been in, we're likely to get an increased number of roads to be named. So we're hoping that this will facilitate more efficient decision making around the naming of roads. And on those roads, all but 2 of the proposed road names by the developers have been recommended. The ones that haven't been recommended are due to the length of or the number of characters in the proposed road name, and they are for short roads. And our policy requires short names for short roads for mapping purposes.
So clarify, can you clarify, but we are recommending to accept those names?
Staff have recommended the alternative road names in those instances. So, for example, Ross Creek Lane was proposed by the developer, and staff have recommended Redwoods Lane. And William Benson Close was proposed by the developer, and the alternative name of Benson Close is recommended by staff.
Very good. There are some hands up, so I assume it's for this item, not for the last one. Councillor Vandervis, yours the first hand.
I would simply like to move the recommendations, all of them as per the order paper.
Very good, noted. Councillor Barker.
I have a question just around the public contributing names to the road naming policy, because I read all the names today and noted those. I just wonder if there was any way that it could be promoted that people could propose names for the roads.
Yeah, through the chair. Yes, absolutely. We could promote that. It is on our website, and there's a form that people can fill in. And then the process going there is that they have to go through the same assessment that the proposed developer names go through against the criteria of the policy, and are presented to the infrastructure committee for inclusion in the pre-approved road name register.
Oh, it'd be good to promote it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Ms. Benson, I noticed, if you could just clarify something for me. My understanding is that we can't use names of living people. We generally don't, but it seems to be okay if it's just their first name, even if it's intended to reflect a living person. Do I have that correct?
Sorry, Councillor, I might have to refer to Tammy on that one.
Yes, you are correct, Councillor Gary. So the policy states that no living or recently deceased names should be approved. When it is just a first name, it's a fairly generic name, so it doesn't identify a particular person. And similarly with surnames, it doesn't. In most instances, it doesn't. It isn't for a particular person.
Even if it's reflecting a particular person. It's kind of a contradiction in terms there for me.
Yes, but I guess it's sort of from the matter that so for example, Sergeant Street. So there are many sergeants around, and so it's not particularly identifying that the name is the road is named after myself, for example. And similarly, if it was called Tammy Close, similarly, it couldn't be identified to me specifically or personally.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Under the road naming policy, what is the percentage of names that have to reflect the tangata whenua story or relationship to that piece of land?
There's not really an analysis of the percentages of names. It's I guess guidance in the policy that that we would prefer names that reflect the geographical, historical, cultural significance of the area, but there's no specific percentages.
It's just interesting. The other day, someone from Otako attached names to a whole lot of landmarks on the peninsula. And I was wondering whether, in fact, a map that has some of those stories for different areas would be helpful for helping people look at significance and meaning in that area. Just an overlay map or something like that.
Yes, we could look into the possibilities around that. We'd have to look at the logistics and also work with Māori Participation Working Party around that.
It's just nice for all different cultures' stories to be told in places, and I just loved that picture that they did of Otako and what all the places their names were and what they meant. So I thought, oh, that could be helpful. So it would be possible.
We could investigate.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Any more questions? Doesn't look like it. Councillor Vandervis has indicated he would move that we take the road names as on the agenda. Do I have a second to Councillor Walker? All those in favour?
Aye.
All those against? Carried. Item number 7, proposed speed limit bylaw amendment 11. Mr. Sargent, Mr. Paulson. Coming in now. Okay. Hello, Mr. Sargent. Can you turn your video and mic on? I see you there. Do either of you two wish to speak to this report?
Yes, I'll just make a few preliminary comments, if that would be helpful. This report is seeking permission to consult on speed limit changes, subject to minor amendments which be approved to the Chief Executive by the Chief Executive. Bearing in mind that this report was written when we didn't know what level of COVID warning we would be in. This amendment has been sat waiting for a while and contains a number of speed limit changes which have been suggested to us and which we have looked at. However, you'll remember that Amendment 11, which related to Port Chalmers speed limits, went ahead in the queue. So this is now Amendment 11. Many of the roads operating under the changes proposed here operate under the current posted speed limit. Also note that 70 kilometres per hour is no longer a supported speed limit by the New Zealand Transport Agency, and that's also the case for 90 kilometres per hour as well. Some roads will require supporting measures to bring speeds to the appropriate operating environment. And as an example of that, the current roundabout, which is to be constructed at Tunnel Beach Road, will help manage the speeds on Blackhead Road. And that's about all I have to say.
Great. There's a few people marked as questions. I just remind people that this is a consultation document going out when you frame your questions. Councillor Vandernis.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley. A question for Mr. Sargent, sorry. In terms of enforcement for some of these much lower speed limits, if we are unable to get enforcement to reduce the speeds down to a limit within 15% of that limit, is there still the rule that we simply can't make the limits that low?
I'm going to defer to Jan here to answer that question because I don't know the technical answer to that question.
Obviously, we are relying heavily on enforcement and police enforcing the roads for speed limits, especially new speed limits. Obviously, they do a lot of training to start off with, rather than just handing out speed tickets. But yes, there is obviously a huge reliance on enforcement. Failing that, there may be some physical means that we will have to implement to ensure the lower speeds.
I'm sure you could ensure lower speeds by making the bumps in the road big enough, but the question was, is there still a rule under NZTA rules whereby if the speed limit is so low that more than 15% don't comply with it, that then that rule has to be changed? That limit has to be changed, should I say?
There's obviously how the roads read. You can't just change a motorway to 50 kilometers an hour. It has to read the right way as well.
Yes.
And that's what we looked at, these speed limits, and how sort of fairly critical as well. Do they actually read the right way? And the majority of the ones that we have put forward here, they are quite winding and narrow speed roads where they actually have an operating speed of less what is posted. So yes, that rule still stands. So you can't just change a road to a very low speed limit. You have to have some.
Thank you for confirming that the rule still stands. Can you please email me a copy, or us perhaps, a copy of that rule so that we can actually understand how it impacts on a report like this?
Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Sorry, I must leave my hand up.
That's all right. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just with regards to your comment around the speed limit review in Port Chalmers, And now that NZTA have decided what they're doing with State Highway 88 in Port Chalmers and running with a 40k speed limit, unfortunately, counted to Council's preferred option of 30k, does that mean that the work that we have done in the adjacent streets has been given effect to?
No, we still need to give effect to our speed limit changes. And additionally, I haven't yet been formally notified by NZTA of what their findings are.
No, communication hasn't been a particular strength in this case, but my understanding via an email from them last week is that it's being gazetted imminently. Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. I understand it's a proposal for public consultation, but one of the long-standing issues that is not traversed is a process by which residential communities wherever in the city have an option to submit that they should have lower speed limits in their residential streets. Is that something that staff are expecting to appear during the consultation process?
To answer that question, I think staff will answer that in relation to the report that's going before P&E on Thursday to canvass a process that we can seek community feedback to, so that they can articulate whether they would like to support lower speed limits in their streets.
And if the meeting on Thursday decides to follow that process, would that be included in this proposal for public consultation or not?
No, we would have to bring forward a new amendment, so Amendment 12, to advance any of those proposed changes.
But given the close timing of this, why would we have the possibility of two processes instead of one, please?
The timing wouldn't be particularly close. We normally only do one speed limit change process per year.
So if the Thursday meeting decides it wants to offer communities some sort of process to say we want slower traffic in our streets or slower speed limits, that will be a matter of some months away. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, there are two ways we could do it: through the normal speed limit setting process. Yes, it would be a number of months away, but under emergency speed limit setting, under the rule, we could do it more quickly. So there are two, particularly in the pandemic environment we're in, there are two pathways available to us.
Well, just coming back to, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to today's paper, given that the speed limit reduction areas are pretty discrete areas around logically and easily identified places like centre of town and so on, would it not be a simple matter to include a clause in this proposal for consultation to offer people an opportunity if they wanted their residential streets also slowed, rather than waiting months and months for whatever process to try and progress something that people have been asking for 2 years that I can think of?
Is this a question of me or Mr. Sargent?
Question of Mr. Sargent.
I'm not aware of the mechanism by which we could allow that to happen in the context of amendment number 11.
Would it not be possible to include an invitation to people to get involved in the discussion around Amendment 11, should they have a desire to have the option of slower speed limits in their residential streets?
I would have thought it would be reasonable for you to move a change to canvass general feedback as to where people might like to see.
Well, I can't because I've spoken, but I would encourage anyone who hasn't yet spoken to move an amendment. Oh, this is a question, of course, isn't it? So I can move it, and I will do so in due course. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just wanting to clarify as well, actually, my questions are a little bit similar to Councillor Benson-Pope's. So can I clarify, Nick, the CBD currently is at 50, is that right?
No, quite a number of roads within the CBD are already at 30 kilometres per
They're
hour.
already at 30, right? So is what George Street and the Octagon are at 30, or are they at 50?
They're at 30 at present.
Right. Okay. So at the moment the CBD changes that we're proposing in here, they don't include those streets, or they do, because that's to go down to 30. So I assume it's just including the other ones that aren't already 30. Then is that correct?
Yeah, if you look at the map at the end of the document, you'll be able to see which are the proposed new 30-kilometre limits, and they are essentially in relation to the CBD. They are Great King Street and Moray Place, i.e. roads that immediately adjoin the existing 30-kilometre per hour speed limit area.
Okay. So and then if these, I assume, will consult with the public as to whether they want these changes. Is that correct?
That's right. This is permission to consult with the public on these proposals.
Right. Okay. And so, but under a pandemic, like you were saying before, in our next meeting in 2 days' time, we're looking to possibly change some speeds again. So that comes under a different legislation, does it?
That comes under a different section of the same Act.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Radish.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Nick. You were talking about convening a mechanism for community consultation on these proposals. Can I just suggest that the Automobile Association be included in any public consultation, because they have expressed in the recent past, the feeling of not being included in some speed limit and traffic discussions. Would that be okay?
I'm happy to assure you, Councillor, that the AA are always on our list of formal consultees.
Yes, well, in which case I don't understand why they have expressed a concern, but they have. Thank you.
Councillor, your hand's back down again now, is that correct? Yeah, and Councillor Barker, is your hand still up? It's going back up. That's down now. I think that's the end of all questions. Councillor Pope, did you want to move an amendment? Oh, your mic's off.
I'm just suggesting that we somewhere in the proposal for discussion include a phrase such as that as part of this proposal, council invites submissions for consideration of slower speeds in specific other residential streets. So I'm avoiding any confusion around the ones that are proposed for reduction now, but hoping that would be enough to trigger people who wanted us to look at slowing things in their streets or their suburb to have the opportunity to give us some feedback about that. Would you like me to read that again?
I just want to make sure we capture the language correctly. So I read.
If I could have that again, please.
Yeah, and then if Ms. Lapper could put it up on a shared screen once it's
that is part of this proposal. Council invites submission for consideration of slower speeds in specific other residential streets. So that would, I hope, give people the opportunity and the basis to talk to their neighbours and think about it.
I just want to seek clarification from Mr. Sargent that if someone was to put in that they wanted a street closed that was not in, not closed, slowed down, that was not in the current consultation document, would that then come forward? Are you suggesting, Councillor Pope, that that would come forward as having been consulted on? If once we make a vote on what comes out of this consultation process?
No, not if it hadn't been consulted on, but I would have thought the normal process is that the outcome of the consultation is published, and then there's further capacity for people to respond.
If I can just respond, yes, that would be correct. Hopefully we would canvass opinions and then bring forward another set of proposals for additional consultation.
But not part of this. I'm just getting advice off to the right here.
Not part of this, no.
It would go into the next bylaw, so it would go into number 12. Amendment 12, right? No, anything that was put forward that's not on Amendment 11 now would not be able to go into Amendment 11 to be voted on. It would have to be basically recorded and put out into the next amendment consultation document, because it has to be seen by everybody in the public. So therefore, in order to meet our consultation requirements, would have to go out as a formal publication of the consultation document. That's sort of what I'm getting from advice to my right. And Mr. Sargent's nodding. Which begs the question then of, do we need an amendment to this particular item, because we're really voting on the consultation document of speed limit bylaw 2004 Amendment 11, and that what Councillor Benson-Pope is really suggesting is that we need to make sure we engage the public properly, so that when we go through a process, we have people have already submitted things they want to see in that process.
I've seconded it.
Okay, well,
so we can get this feedback.
Okay, so then it's been seconded by His Worship. Councillor Benson-Pope, you want to talk to the motion, the amendment? The amendment.
I'm not wanting to be difficult, but this has been an issue that has been live for a couple of years that I'm aware of, and probably longer. And I'm sorry that we're sort of getting caught in process. I've got no problem with it being part of a subsequent process, but I don't really want to keep waiting and have yet another consultative process which avoids reaching any conclusion. So I'm not going to withdraw it. It will happen to it what happens to it. But if people come back with streets that haven't been notified, as they probably wouldn't have been, then if that triggers a further process, that's fine. And we can publicise that and the rest of it. It's just that a lot of people are aware that there are issues all over town, not just in the streets we've identified and read on that map at the end of this submission, where traffic volumes are traffic speeds are dangerously high. And I think we need to address that. And I'd like to get on with it sooner rather than later. So I hope for your support.
So this is an amendment to the resolution. So remember, we're only talking about the amendment. We're not talking about the resolution at the moment. I see some hands up. I see Councillor Radich's hand up. Do you want to ask a question of the mover?
Yes, I did. Before it was even seconded, because I guess that was the spot for asking questions. But why not allow the possibility that some parties in the community might want to raise the speed limit in certain roads that have been deemed to be too slow for effective traffic movement. So in other words, not just continual decreasing of speeds, but the possibility that a speed might perhaps go up by 10 kilometres an hour. Did you hear that all right?
Yeah, I'm not it's to the speaker, to Councillor.
Councillor what do you think of that concept of just saying, rather than decreasing speeds, just amending speeds?
I don't think that.
I'll comment on that in my right of reply.
Okay. Councillor Vandervis has a question.
My question related to the original motion, and my question is it possible for me to vote for the motion with the exception of the rural roads category? Can we divide the motion up into all the urban reductions, which I'm quite happy with, but I believe a lot of the rural ones are not appropriate? Is there any way that I can vote against just those rural reductions down to 60 Ks?
The staff who advised me are already asking another question, but this is a consultation document. We're not, so why would you need to separate them out?
I'm also aware of the history of consultation documents. Once we pass them, they tend to wander through. So what I want to know is, am I able to vote against the high-risk rural roads aspect of it, or do I need to vote against the whole thing? Because I'm quite happy with all the other speed reductions in town.
I don't see it as a standalone part of this resolution. That's the problem. We'd have to rewrite the resolution to get the rural roads taken out of it, is what I see would be a challenge. I guess
we could structure the next report, because this is just about consulting.
well, that's why I've pointed this out to Councillor Van. This is the consultation document. He doesn't have much faith in our ability to consult properly.
Thank you.
I don't see how we can do it, to be honest.
Okay, that's
right.
fine. I'm happy with that answer. That's fine.
Okay, Councillor Hall.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Benson Pope, where you've got the other residential streets, would you consider changing that to other streets or roads within the city, allowing for rural stuff as well as just residential?
Yes, but I said that would have to be dealt with by an amendment, I would have thought, Mr. Chairman. I'm personally happy with that, if the meeting's happy with it.
Yeah, we could just take out residential, right?
Yeah, but take out residential and put other.
Well, if we take it out, it doesn't define the street. It could be any type of street.
That's fine.
Streets or roads within the city.
That's fine if the meeting's happy with it.
Very good. I think Ms. Latham has control of the keyboard. If we could take out the word residential.
There's an in missing as well, by the way.
And then change streets to streets or roads.
Yeah, within the city. Yeah.
Within the city.
City boundaries, sorry.
Yeah, within the city.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then there's.
We've got our in. Thank you very much.
Very good. That looks good. So we have a mover and a seconder. We're ready to vote. All those in favour to the amendment?
Aye.
I need to see more of the screen to be able to take this vote. Okay, raise your hand if you are in favour. Very good. And raise your hand if you are against. Carried.
Sorry.
Do you want it by division?
No. As the potential chair, Councillor O'Malley, as the potential chair of this hearing, the consultation will be coming to. I would sit back.
Yeah, I actually didn't ask for those. Abstained. I noticed you didn't move your hand. Abstained, Councillor Wiley. Anybody else abstaining? Very good. Okay, so now that comes in.
Mr. Chair?
Sorry, Councillor Gary, I can't see your screen.
Just to say that, remember, I'm sitting back. They could be recorded, please.
Oh, very well. You are sitting back on this, yes. So this now is added to the substantive motion. It'll be clause F in the substantive motion because we've got A through E. Can I have a mover of the most substantive motion, which is on, I believe, page 71? Yeah, Hawkins, seconder. Councillor Benson Pope. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Does the vote against want to be noted? By any chance?
I didn't wish to speak either, Mr. Chairman. It's fine.
It's just that we have difficulty communicating, so I'm giving people the opportunity to have, if they want to be recorded, to say they did or did not.
I don't believe we had the opportunity to debate the substantive motion.
Oh, you're quite right, actually. You are quite right. And now I've really stuffed up because we voted. I'm afraid we voted, Councillor Vandervis. So it is going under consultation. It is a consultation document, and I apologise to you, Councillor Vandervis, for moving it to the vote before we spoke.
Okay.
Let's see if we can get on through item number 8. DCC submission on the New Zealand Rail Plan. That's Ms. Benson is speaking to that.
Hello. So we're on the rail plan.
Yes.
Oh.
100 on now.
Okay, so essentially we've responded to the Ministry of Transport's rail plan or rail growth plan going forward. A lot of our feedback has been around the significant investment for places other than the Otago Southland area, and probably a little bit of lack of understanding or maybe oversight of the freight task in particular in the Otago and Southland area, with the large proportion, well, 100% of Fonterra Edendale's product comes on rail through Port of Otago, and Port of Otago has a rail mode share of 70%. And without any consideration for any potential growth or further investment opportunities. Equally, the submission is heavily metrocentric in the Auckland and Wellington area, or primarily metrocentric for those two areas, without having a look at whether there are other opportunities for passenger transport, be it tourism or PT, in areas outside of those, outside of Auckland and Wellington. So our submission has just been probably based on trying to get this region and Southland, to be fair, a little bit more front and centre in terms of the investment priorities. It's a little bit similar to our submission on the GPS, which is just saying we need to look at Dunedin and Southland, and we need to look at potentially look at passenger opportunities for an environment that has its own Britomart. We have a Britomart, the Dunedin railway station, and we have a lot of travelling public from Mosgiel. So yeah, so that was our submission, that we really needed to bring that to the forefront for Dunedin and for the Otago Southland region.
Thanks very much. I also note that Councillor Hall has indicated that he's going to sit back on this particular item. Time for questions. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Ms. Benson, Mr. Sargent and the team for a very compelling case made in this submission. I might have missed it, forgive me if I have, but I don't see any mention of the hillside workshops in the submission, and would have thought it would have been slipped in there somewhere. Have I missed that?
No, you haven't missed it. It wasn't in the submission. I think the most of the feedback, Councillor, was really around the land transport opportunity, as opposed to, you know, hillside workshops is essentially a manufacturing environment.
Indeed, I guess I was thinking around the framework to support the land transport option, because never let a chance go by is what I always think. But thank you, very compelling case made.
Any more questions? I would actually like to move this myself, that the council approves in retrospect the DCC submission on the draft New Zealand Rail Plan. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Staines. I'm going to quickly. Oh, Councillor Wiley, your hand is up. Were you going to ask a question, or do you want to speak?
I was going to ask a question. Just under COVID-19, was this submission always earmarked to go in on the 11th? Was there any extension on it? Is the government working on extensions on this, or are they pretty hard and fast at the moment?
So there was an extension on this one, yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Councillor Elder, you have a question? Mic's off.
Sorry about that. I do have a couple of questions actually, and it's to do with passenger rail networks. And I know we've got a lot of people coming into Dunedin from the south, and we are looking at fare reduction through buses with the regional council. My question is there going to be alongside that a feasibility study of the opportunity that Auckland has, where they have quite big buses that go directly to Dunedin from Mosgiel? So other opportunities to move people, you know, a mass amount of people. Because I note I was at a meeting the other day and they said it was cheaper.
Hold on, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
The item we're debating is, or asking questions of, is the DCC submission on the New Zealand rail plan. And I think our discussion of buses fits.
Okay.
Yeah, I uphold that, Worship. So, Councillor, if we just stick specifically to the submission.
The other question is, I suppose, and in this we talk about mode shift and the use of, like the Caversham Tunnel, etc. for.
Councillor, I think you might be talking about the GPS, the government policy statement on transport, which is the next item.
Okay.
This item is specifically the New Zealand rail plan.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay, I'll direct those questions there, I think.
We're waiting for them.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Any more questions? Okay, I have indicated I'd like to move this, and I do believe Councillor Stein seconded it, so I will just quickly speak to it myself. This does to somewhat extent run into the second issue we have, which is the GPS on transport and the role that rail may play. We'll have an overlapping issue here, but the reality of what this particular submission pays attention to is the national spend on rail in general. And one of the things in the submission was the identification that primarily Auckland and Wellington figured very highly in the government's vision, and very few other cities figured in it. And I believe from our perspective, from Dunedin's perspective, we suffer from the tyranny of distance. We are a bit too far away from the decision-making people to have been taken as seriously as we might. We are one of the heaviest freight lines in the country, yet the freight line is only a class 3 line, which is invest and maintain, but no growth. And I believe that one of the reasons that we do not perform well in the national psyche is that between us and Wellington is the city of Christchurch that is not well aligned for rail. And often I've heard the statement that if Christchurch isn't good enough for it, then Dunedin certainly isn't good enough for it because you're that much smaller. So partly what we're trying to do in this submission is to raise our profile and say, in fact, you have overlooked us, especially along our freight lines. So remember, this is not just about people, this is also about movement of goods. And for the quality of life in the centre of the city, to get as much freight onto rail and off our roads is a very important thing when it comes to how we live and how we go about in our city. Other speakers, Neil Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I certainly welcome the interest in our rail network from government about as much as I welcome the lack of ambiguity in our submission as drafted. The points I made very clearly. I just wanted to speak quickly to the strategic themes as outlined in the plan itself. One being investing in a national rail network to maintain freight, and two, investing in metropolitan rail to support growth. And it's clear from this submission and from your comments previously, Mr. Chairman, that the first of these isn't happening. And I think that's an extraordinary level of underinvestment in the freight network in the south of the South Island, particularly given the key role that primary production has played and will likely continue to play in our economic recovery, and that certainly needs addressing. And secondly, in terms of metropolitan rail services, I think the last three words are key there, where it talks about investing in metropolitan rail to support growth. Now, this is laudable and entirely appropriate, particularly when it's taken alongside and incorporated into spatial planning decisions, but it isn't enough. And I often get the feeling that governments see investment in public transport primarily as a way of reducing traffic congestion and work backwards from the most congested transport networks to prioritise the investment in public transport, where we need policy settings and funding settings that allow the environmental and social inclusion benefits that a modern public transport network offer more universally around the country, rather than only focusing on accommodating rapidly growing metropolitan areas. And so I welcome the direction of this submission, reminding government that there are potential passengers that live south of Wellington, and indeed my own parliamentary colleagues, that they do exist south of Timaru also. And hopefully this ongoing advocacy in this direction, if it's supported, and hopefully it will be by other regional centres that have been left out in the cold by these priorities, join us in supporting something that might truly resemble a national rail network. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, yeah, I agree. I'm fully in support of this submission. I think we need, like several of us have been saying for a long time, actually, we're being left out on some of these things. Like, for example, I think even the Mayor's own party, the Green Party, offered some ideas that some of the main cities could get funding for rail, but we weren't in that. And I think it's really important that we let them know we're keen for rail and we'd love to be considered. So there's so many advantages to it, and Dunedin is a small city that punches above its weight. As Janine Benson said, we've already got the Britomart, we've got this most fabulous building sitting there, and it would be great to see it, I think, being utilised. So I think it's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor van der Lis.
I would like to support this recommendation, but can't for two reasons. First of all, it's retrospective, and we see far too many retrospectives here, which basically discourage anyone from wanting to argue against them. The second thing is that much as I approve of putting a lot more of the heavy freight of New Zealand on rail, this particular submission also, in fact, I think primarily pushes for passenger rail. Passenger rail is a Victorian system for moving people about that is no longer affordable. There hasn't been any viable passenger rail system in the South Island for a very long time. And for the Mayor to go public in today's newspaper and want to claim that there's a lot of public interest in passenger rail may actually be quite true, but then there would be a lot of public interest in a heavily subsidised helicopter transportation system as well. The fact is that neither passenger rail nor helicopter transport from Mosgiel is ever going to be financially sustainable. To waste an extraordinary amount of money setting up a system which would decide whether or not there was real public interest, when in fact the public interest is irrelevant. The fact is that passenger rail in the South Island is simply an economic non-starter. The heavy subsidy of it could perhaps get something happening on a small scale for a little while, but in terms of trying to save Taieri Gorge Railway with its $10 million worth of deferred maintenance and complete lack of tourists now to pay for the system, there is no way that we can, especially post-COVID, actually make this work financially. It's an absolute non-starter. It was a non-starter before COVID, when we had a whole lot of wealthy tourists able to pay decent amounts to subsidise some other routes. Those tourists are now not coming, and they're not coming for the foreseeable future. So this whole idea that we can somehow resurrect passenger rail is an absolute pipe dream and promises to cost the ratepayers of Dunedin $1 million just to investigate as a pipe dream. For this reason, I'm completely opposed to it, and I find it remarkable that we should be looking for public interest in something we simply can't afford to supply. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley. Microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be supporting this motion. And the key that I saw here that we really, to be honest, I didn't feel we pushed strong enough was about an inland port south of Dunedin at Melbourne. You know, we do basically want to emphasise the freight networks. That freight is 30% of freight still moved to Port Otago by road, and that an inland port at Melbourne would significantly reduce the number of truck movements through the city. And that's vital for our city and our movements. So redefining the truck movements, reducing the traffic congestion, especially when we also look at our goals for 2030, when every tonne of freight moved by rail versus road produces 66% less carbon emissions. So I would have liked to have seen a greater emphasis about an inland port, but I think overall it was a good submission.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? I'll be brief on my right of reply. This is true, it is a retrospective approval. However, again, rather like the other ones that we've just gone through, it was sent out to councillors to look at before the deadline and before it was sent in. The unfortunate problem was that it was sent out the same week we were doing public submissions on the annual plan, and I would not be surprised if some of you didn't have time or could not have put in on it. For myself, I do believe, though, it is consistent with many of the policies that the council runs, and it fits in with a lot of stuff that's been going on at the Regional Transport Committee. The inland port at Milton is on the Regional Land Transport Plan. It's been discussed, and that is an aspect the Clutha District is putting forward. An opportunity now to connect the two economies of Dunedin City and the Clutha District, in fact, with that inland port being built. The commentary around Metropolitan Rail, I think the thing to remember about us compared to anybody else is that we already have the basic rail infrastructure already built in the middle of the city. We are quite different from almost any other Metropolitan Rail issue. So basically we're talking about minor track upgrades and new rolling stock, which is probably the lowest level of commitment per capita that any urban Metropolitan Rail request would have. The real reason of this really was to simply elevate our position in the national perspective to the level that I think this city deserves. So having said that, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 9, DCC submission on the Government Policy Statement of Land Transport 2021. Ms Benson and Ms Hitchcock.
So I guess we'll take the report as read and take any questions.
Good. Do I have any questions? Councillor Elder.
So under the strategic priority safety, the Dunedin City Council support the strong alignment. Was there no consideration given for strategic priority safety projects for Dunedin? Is that what the story is?
I think, Councillor, what we're trying to say is that we probably need more attention. We're not saying that we don't have it, but we're just identifying that Dunedin has a high risk rating, and that we do need to pay more attention to that particular aspect of road safety in the area. And I think it probably comes back again to potentially just elevating the position that Dunedin holds in these kind of discussions.
So does this apply to the regional transport plan?
I might have to defer to Stacey for that one.
Sorry, I missed some of the conversations that were going on there. The submission that we've put in on the GPS informs what goes into the regional land transport plan. Yes.
So you're aware of a big desire for the people of Mosgiel and Dunedin to have the ability to bike or walk safely through the tunnels to Mosgiel and back again, and for Green Island and Fairfield to have the same privilege. And that was, are you aware that those were submitted in the annual plan and there's a huge desire for that?
Yes, we are definitely aware of that. Yes.
And also that there is certainly a call from many in Waikawaiti, Waitati, Karatani, and the coastal region for the same privilege to be able to bike safely between communities.
Yes, we're also aware of the Oamaru Dunedin section as well.
So does that have the possibility to be elevated as a strategic priority safety to enable mode shift?
So the tunnels councillor is already in the long-term plan.
Yes.
The Oamaru Dunedin one isn't, but I think it's going to the next infrastructure council. A paper is being written for it then.
Yes, because I think there's a will not just for urban transport, but links between townships and communities to link in with Dunedin. And I think that desires around safe and mode shift. And also, my question is, with electric bikes, does that make it different in the sense of being able to get to places easier and faster? Has electric bikes changed that whole concept of mode shift?
Yes, I believe it has. I think it's made active transport a lot more accessible for some people that don't have the same physical ability as people that already ride bikes. So I think it's definitely there's something good going for Dunedin for e-bikes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Councillor, I'll just clarify a couple of things, if I may. So in November 2018, through this committee, the committee approved the Urban Cycleways program. So that includes the Chain Hills Tunnel and the Caversham Tunnel linked to Mosgiel, and filling some of the other bits and pieces. So that's what staff are currently working on at the moment, and as Janine said, is in the long-term plan. Some of those other ones that you're passionate about, including the Oamaru to Dunedin one, the feasibility studies there's a report ready. I think we're bringing that to the Economic Development Committee in June for councillors. And then through the long-term plan, I guess that's how you'll build some of those other things, or how we can work more collaboratively with some of the community groups to progress those projects.
And the regional land transport.
And the regional land transport.
Thank you for that.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the submission. My questions are around, there are two of them. The matrix on page 169 of the agenda, answering question 11 in the survey, where it asks for our feedback on decreasing, retaining, or increasing GPS allocation. And I applaud you for not just ticking the increase box all the way down. But were those decisions based on prioritization, or are staff actually comfortable that the allocation for those classes to retain or decrease are adequate as proposed?
Who wants to answer that?
Oh, what page? 111 did you say?
It's this 169. It's most probably is the state highway maintenance decrease on the GPS allocation is probably what solutions.
I'm getting there, Mr. Chairman, but that was, yeah, it is that table where it asks for feedback on various activities and whether the allocation in the GPS should be decreased, retained, or increased. I'm just trying to get a sense of whether the decisions that staff have made in drafting this are based on pragmatism and not saying that you should put more money in everywhere and therefore these are our priorities, or whether there's a genuine belief that the money is adequate in the GPS for all of these activities.
Janine, I'm not sure.
I'll give it a go. So I believe the ones that we've said retain, I think we are confident that we've got enough in there. I don't think we've gone over prioritized anything within those activity classes. And the ones where we've suggested that they should be increased, there's always room for improvement.
Okay, and as Councillor O'Malley alluded, I am interested in the suggestion that the state highway maintenance budget should decrease, given that there are significant, particularly key freight routes in our district that are on the state highway system and while being upgraded and in varying states of repair. Is that suggestion an acknowledgement of the work that's been going on here, or what's driving that around the highway maintenance budget?
I think that was a result of where we're asking for increases. Obviously, there will need to be decreases in some other areas because there's only so much money to go around. But we feel that the proportion of money going towards state highway maintenance is probably not the same proportion that could go to activities that could really improve road safety for people, especially in Dunedin, given that our urban intersections are one of the highest risks in the country. We've also got so much more that we could do with active transport and public transport services.
Thank you, it's helpful.
Councillor van der Vis.
On page 165, and not for the first time, it makes reference to, in light of Dunedin's poor road safety record, do staff recognise that the main reason that Dunedin has a poor road safety record is because we have an unusually large number of young people and an unusually large number of old people that are the main contributors to road accidents?
Yeah, I think there is an acknowledgement of that, Councillor. So in our statistics, there's approximately, was it just over half of the deaths and serious harm incidents are to vulnerable members of the community, including the elderly and wheelchair and visually impaired people. So yes, staff are aware of that.
And would you include drunk students as being visually impaired?
No, I wouldn't put them in that category myself, but I acknowledge your point.
Okay, just checking, thank you. Thanks for answering the question.
I mean, I have sat on the Road Safety Action Committee, and students did not factor highly in the numbers. It was more, in fact, it was difficult from that committee to identify exactly what the underlying root causes were, but we're either number one or number two every time we do the analysis on pedestrian vehicle interactions, bad ones.
And it's particularly in the elderly and wheelchair and visually impaired, more than half.
Students do particularly show in all the e-scooter admissions to the emergency department of the hospital. I know this from someone that works there.
Very good. Councillor Gary.
Just to follow on from that comment, I would like to just say that every human life is of value, and the point that's made in this document is around the poor safety record. Whatever the analysis of that is, the fact remains we have a poor safety record, and that's the most important point. and all of us will be old one day, some sooner than others.
Any more questions?
I should have added, don't you think, Ms. Hitchcock? I do apologise, Chair.
That's all right. It's like playing a game of Jeopardy sometimes. Is that the end of questions? Then do I have a mover? I'm happy to move it. Do we have a seconder? His Worship is a seconder. I'm going to just kind of quickly speak on this because I think it's been fairly well traversed. I think one of the things that has highlighted here, though, is that when we do have these documents out for consultation among ourselves, we've sometimes missed them a little bit. And I've noticed in today's discussions, there's been a lot of how about this, how about that in these documents, which we probably should have traversed before they came to us at the meeting. So I think we probably need to work a bit better on how we discuss on these submissions before we finalise that the council's had a chance to really look at it. I would note that this is a submission on the government policy statement on transport. So this is not to the National Land Transport Plan. This is more the strategic directions that the government is taking. So we're talking about, especially important here with what is called the activity classes for NZTA and the role that a concept of mode neutrality would play in transport. And I think to His Worship's comment about moving stuff up and down, that is to somewhat is in response to the activity class system of how we do this. There is a fixed amount of money available to the transport system, and it's moved in and out of activity classes. So if you want your activity class to have more money in it, you have to recommend that another activity class has money taken out of it. One of the perspectives that we have as a council is our local roads, which is one of the reasons that we suggest potentially the local road spending activity class might go up and against the state highways one going down. And it's also pretty much a government position because we've moved away from the roads of national significance model to a safety model. So you've seen those activity classes get more funding put in them. And probably that's about it, really. I think I finished with a statement on my own at the end of that, which is, again, we're trying to raise the position of the city in the national perspective. There's been a lot of money spent on some of the big roading projects and transport projects in some of the other cities, and we have not fared well in them. When the large infrastructure spend was announced midway through the year and Dunedin didn't get any money from it, we were told by the senior staff at NZTA it's because we had nothing on our regional land transport plan that was able to be spent on. So one of the things that we have been addressing is that we need to basically start asking for more so that we're asking proportionally for our part of the share as everybody else's, and that's captured in this submission. Anybody else want to speak now that I've spoken? Councillor Walker and Councillor Van, is your hand still up?
Yeah, I'll be very, very brief as ever. Just want to say this along with the New Zealand Rail Planner Excellent submissions. So well done. I even support the wonderful dig at the end of point 13 when you comment on point 24 that I think in quote 6.8 billion to New Zealand and nothing to Otago Southland. So good on you for pointing that out. Thank you.
Councillor Van.
I agree that we've not fared well regarding government spending on roads, but if you look over several decades, we haven't fared well on government spending in just about any department you want to mention. And there are a number of reasons for this, the fundamental one being, of course, that we're not a marginal seat and that our elected representatives have very little incentive to actually push hard for spending in Dunedin, given that it doesn't matter what they spend here, the electoral result will be similar. That aside, I believe that we should push hard for certain specific amounts of spending. And it's hard to do that when we end up with an agenda like today, which has dozens of pages of all kinds of detail that we can't all possibly hope to agree with, but that we're expected to tick off, and worse, to tick off retrospectively. The process is broken. It's not realistic for these submissions to go forward, especially retrospectively, and claim to be approved or represented by the majority of the public that we are supposed to represent. I agree entirely that we haven't fared well with government spending and that we need to do things differently if we're going to fare any better. And my suggestion is that to do things differently, we need to send in submissions that are very, very short, very, very focused on a particular issue, a bit like the letter to the editor. Get it in 150 words, get it publicised and get it stuck under all our MPs' noses, and then we might get some traction. Massive documents like this simply ask, in my opinion, to get filed and collect dust. But thanks very much for trying anyway. I appreciate the effort.
Mr. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I note the difficulties with raising our profile in a national perspective, but this is exactly what we're trying to do in this submission. And I'd like to thank the staff who contributed to this submission. It's a point of shame to me, and I very rarely say that about our city, but it's a point of shame that we have such a poor road safety record and have had for some time. And it's a point of real frustration that we don't get our share to address this. So the most important thing we can be is united in our view. Yes, we'll differ on some of the minor points and detail, but we need to be united in our view to say to government through the submission that we want a share of the pie, and this is why. That is the most important thing. Ideally, it's not ideal to be retrospectively signing this off, but that's what we've got in front of us. So what we need is a strong voice, and I thank the staff for giving voice to those strong views about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elder.
I'd like to support this wholeheartedly, and I also want to support wholeheartedly Dunedin having an aspirational vision for the regional transport plan and putting things into that. We look at the Port Chalmers to Dunedin shared cycleway, which is 100% funded by NZTA as a safety project, and that is the aspiration we should be going for. I think of all the people in Mosgiel and Green Island and Fairfield who could, if we got that funding for safety project for highway, to get that shared cycleway that hundreds of people will be able to use to travel to and from Dunedin. And I see the peninsula and the Port Chalmers shared cycleways, not just as recreational, not just as tourists, but also as transport routes that will be used a lot. And I can't recommend enough having an aspirational vision for also Oamaru to Dunedin for the very same reasons that it will help us economically, safety-wise, mode shift wise, and will create an amazing city. So I'm really supportive of us being aspirational and going hard, and asking the regional transport plan for putting in more aspirational goals to the regional transport plan. So I believe that Dunedin's an amazing city and a great livable city, and these kind of goals will make it that much better and safer and enable people to use all sorts of modes of transport. So thank you very much, and I really support what you're saying.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with a lot of what everyone else has said, but I just want to add to that I do have a concern about us getting quite a few of these submissions in retrospective, and I realise we've been in you know, state of emergency and things are difficult. So hopefully when things get back to our new normal, that this won't be the case, because it is, obviously it would be good if we could discuss them and debate them before we sent the submissions in. I think that is quite essential, actually. I hear what Councillor van der Vis is saying about the cost of rail, and he is correct. And certainly at a time like this where a lot of people are suffering, I don't want our council to look like we're spending money on things that they might seem wasteful. However, I think when there's opportunities to apply for funding at a national level, and that we need to have our hand in there and say, don't forget us. Because as some of the other councillors have said, you know, we might be able to get enough funding to do this. And we also, this comes on the back of the rail union asking us to look at a trial with the rail. So that ties in with this transport as well. And I think we deserve it to give it a go for those staff and to see what funding we can get. And so it's not money coming from council if we get it funded from the government. Obviously we might have to put in a little bit, but I think we need to try. That's the least we can do.
Thank you. Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To begin, a couple of points, one around the retrospective approval of submissions. And while I agree that it's not ideal procedurally, these drafts don't exist in a vacuum. They're written based on the existing policies and strategies that the council have, and then they are circulated in advance for councillors to input into the drafting of them, should they choose to. And it would be great if we were always given enough time for these deadlines to meet our committee schedule, but we don't. But I would hate for people to get the idea that our staff are just making these up and then putting them to us for retrospective approval. Secondly, Councillor van der Vis has again offered his opinion that the reason we are short of government investment is because of a lack of marginal seats in the city. And while that may be historically true of our electorate seats, we don't have a first past the post electoral system, and basing an advocacy strategy around an electoral system that we don't currently have doesn't seem particularly constructive. But even bearing that in mind, that doesn't explain the significant investment we've seen finally in finishing the State Highway 88 shared path, the building of the new Dunedin Hospital, the restoration of our historic courthouse building, the resuscitation of hillside workshops. And that's just a short list in recent memory of significant government investment in the city. Not bad given our lack of marginal seats which are required for government investment in your city. But to the paper, you know, we need policy and funding mechanisms that support mode shift across the country, and we'd certainly need it in Dunedin to be able to support what our community tell us they want in terms of safe, active transport, in terms of affordable and efficient public transport and low carbon options for moving freight around. Otherwise, we'll never reach our zero carbon aspirations by 2030 as a city, nor will we reach the government's 2050 target if we don't make these options available across the country, rather than, and this goes back to the earlier paper as well, rather than focusing solely on investment in what are seen as high growth populations. You know, we need these to be far more universally accessible, and I just want to thank finally in closing the caveat around coastal shipping. And it certainly is an industry that would be easier to support were it to operate within a more robust regulatory regime than it currently does, because, you know, it is a concern that it seems to operate outside of certainly all carbon accounting that is currently going on, and other environmental standards due to the vagaries of the international shipping trade, and I welcome some stronger direction from government around that, because it's certainly, that aside, certainly is something that needs to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Your Worship, any more speakers? I'm going to use my right of reply just to touch on a couple of points. I would not necessarily agree either with Councillor Van versus view that the reason that we've not done well is because we're not a marginal seat area. I think it really reflects the way national funding bodies work and the way they approach their funding models. And our size has not done us much of, we have not been perceived in a manner that gets us funded properly because we've been looked at by our population alone and not our geographical position in the country. We are the most important city in the Southern South Island, and we're not recognised as that. We're recognised as a small provincial city of 130,000. And those two different definitions give you a completely different kind of spending. I acknowledge too that this is a retrospective submission, but as His Worship has said, staff did not act in a vacuum. They are acting in relationship to all of our strategies, and in fact, some of our strategies are mentioned in the submission. In addition to which, they are available to talk to, and as many respects, they have taken into account the views of councillors who have contacted them, and they also did put this out for us to comment on one more time. And I don't think they received much in the way of comment back at that time, and I do acknowledge it was because we were right in the middle of something else. I want to be, on a positive note though, I think we are raising the awareness of the importance of these funding structures to all of us on the council, so we understand how important they are. And then by understanding their importance, then we can put in our views on how we should approach them. And I would say that on the 4 years I've been on council, our ability to understand these national funding models has improved dramatically across the councillors. And I think that's one of the reasons that this submission on the GPS is quite different than it was just 3 years ago. So I'm very happy with this submission. I congratulate staff for getting it out on time, and I'm hoping that it has the effects that I want it to have, which is to raise us back up as to one of the 4 main regional centres in the country. With that, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. On to the item number 10, Otago South and Three Waters investigation. Mr. Drew and Mr. Dyer.
Just let Tom connect.
Yeah. Tom, once you're unmuted, it's yours.
So while Tom's sorting himself out, I'll just say, taken as read and happy to take questions from councillors. $228. Councillor Barker.
There it is. Mr. Dyer's here now, so do you want us to comment or we just take it as read?
Take it as read, please, councillors.
Very good. Councillor Barker.
Kia ora, I'm just wondering what the consequences are of not doing this investigation in the light of what the government's paper that from January 2020. Could you please explain that a little bit more?
So we're in a position where the government is looking at driving a reform agenda, and quite what that reform agenda, what form that reform agenda will take is yet to be clear. But what they are suggesting is that that reform is likely is a likely proposal for New Zealand in the Three Waters space. What they've given us is the opportunity to educate some of that reform by looking at some of the local and regional aspects of these challenges. And what we're trying to do with this work is put our best foot forward for the region, and try and address some of those issues and raise them so that they can be put into a national context, and whatever decisions may come are best influenced by I guess some fairly educated judgment.
Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
I note that you've had some meetings already. What do you see the benefits of us working together as a region?
I think speaking from a very general point of view, some of the things that have been touted as benefits to regional collaboration in the Three Waters space are stuff like critical mass and kind of economic viability of a utility, and a whole bunch of other elements. So, you potentially have more people able to deliver clever strategic thinking from a regional centre for somewhere like, for instance, Gore or one of our smaller neighbouring councils. So, Gore don't have the same level of resource that Dunedin City has, but a regional utility would potentially be able to provide more capacity and capability to ensure clever thinking happened up front and that best possible investment decisions were made within the Three Waters space. There are other opportunities there in terms of information sharing and in terms of buying power and all of that sort of stuff. But there's also potential for things that are useful within the status quo to be lost. So, for instance, local influence and all of that sort of thing to be diminished slightly. So, what we're trying to do with this work is look at a balanced suite of options, a long list of options, and consider all of those things. So, what are the pros and cons of each one along the way, and what are some of the steps or the interim steps that we might be able to take in terms of collaboration that might prove that that Three Waters could potentially be delivered through local authorities long term, but with small steps like shared contracts and that sort of thing. So we're looking at that full suite of options and trying to make sure that we present a balanced view. Sorry, and the next step would be to, provided this work all goes well and that there is clearly some options and some merit in looking further, then the next step would be to look at those options in more detail and start to develop a preferred option suite.
Oh, thank you for that, Tom.
Councillor Raj.
Yes. Thanks, Mr. Chairman and Tom. Do you have any illustrative examples that might show us what you mean by some of the advantages coming out of this discussion, or even the aspirational examples of what you'd like to achieve? Just more specific.
I could probably do that at a number of levels. One might be we find ourselves in a situation fairly regularly where we, every 5 to 10 years we put out a maintenance contract. That maintenance contract has also has other maintenance contracts being put out from the 67 other utilities that are doing the same work. A lot of those maintenance contracts have different specs that have been developed in isolation. It typically costs about $200,000 to get one of these contracts to tender. We could potentially be sharing all of those, sharing those contracts across the country and doing that work once instead of 67 times. However, by the same token, that also starts to reduce the ability for local influence, but that would be one example of where there might be benefit.
Right, thank you. So in the area perhaps of uniformity of pipe sizes or lengths and things like that to give interchangeability and
a huge number of things could be standardised. Yes, a lot of what we do is under the ground. No one ever sees it, and they're always, the level of customer satisfaction is measured on whether or not the tap turns on, or whether or not the toilet flushes properly. And so long as we're delivering that outcome, standardised specifications and all of that sort of thing could still do that job.
Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Tom, just looking at paragraph 1718 about the financial implications, this has really been driven by government in the first place, has it not?
Yes.
So, and then we have to apply to the government for some funding and hope we get X amount of funding in.
We've been given an indication that we'll get what we applied for.
Yeah, that's correct.
Which was 50. The Dunedin City Council's contribution is estimated to be 58,000.
Yeah,
yeah.
So across all the councils, the government's paid about half. That was the offer that came from government. was
Yeah,
to
so
pay for half of the overall cost of the piece of work to work out how we could collaborate better. And I think the anticipation is that the benefits will flow back to us from that increased collaboration.
So if the government chose not to give us half, would we still proceed to the level that we're looking to undertake here, or would we scale that back? And what is the risk around government funding on this?
So we have had sorry,
Oh, the government's given an indication that they are likely to meet us with what we've asked for. If they didn't give us anything, I think it would be fair to say that the work we've done to date does point out that there are opportunities for better outcomes from closer collaboration. And it might be true that some of that is predominantly for smaller councils, but there is no doubt that we will learn through this process as well, and that will make us better at what we do. So I think we're probably far enough along now that even if the government had said no, we'd still be wanting to do something in this space.
Okay, and thank you, Sue. And one other question relating to that: do you see similar pathways of this approach with the other councils going forward in other areas of council business?
You might remember when we did the Section 17A reviews, Councillor Wiley, this is going back about 3 or 4 years, we looked at across every area of council business and whether we thought there were savings that could be made or improvements that could be made, and whether they were worth the investment of time and effort and money into exploring those things. The first cab off the rank was civil defence, and in fact we have amalgamated that. It operates out of the regional council. That was the first one. We've made minor kind of improvements in the way we work together in some other areas. This one here was the next area where we felt there was large savings, potential savings and improvements. In the roading space, there's a possibility of some improvements, but some of that does require that people might have to move, and obviously that's not an easy sell in some parts of the region, to imagine losing your staff to another part of the region. So some of the savings are harder to realise in other parts of the council. This one here is a pretty obvious low-hanging fruit for all of us.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Any more questions? I just have two for you, Tom. You mentioned the government's driving a reform agenda. It's mooted, I've heard, that agenda may end up being all the way out to a fully single-bodied national body or a combination of regional bodies that work together. Is that the two sort of models that are being considered at the moment?
Yeah. So there's been several options put into a number of domains, and those domains include industry, workshops, and conferences and all of that sort of thing. We've had ministers speak about this sort of stuff for several years now, and the options have ranged from a single utility to manage water supply for all of New Zealand, right the way through to the status quo, and anything in between in terms of numbers. They've also talked at great length about what those options might look like. So, council or controlled organisations with shareholdings or whatever it might be, which is a really similar model to what exists in Tasmania, or a range of other nationally funded bodies as well.
And so my question then is really to this particular study. Are we doing this so that we have a better understanding of the Otago Southland area, so that as the government moves forward in its reforms, we have an ability to explain with accuracy what our challenges are and what our strengths would be if we were, let's say, to go forward with an Otago Southland model? Yeah,
that's correct. So we'll be able to use this information to inform the debate as we move forward. But like Sue said before, there's also the opportunity that should this reform agenda disappear, that we can look at where the benefits might be to sharing with our neighbours locally.
Great, thank you.
The one thing I would say is I think it would be fair to say that the government has been reasonably consistently single-minded that they are not going to let this go and that they are expecting reforms. So although we might say if the government backs off, this also lets us work out how to do things differently. I think it would be fair to say that absolutely none of us think that the government is planning to back off.
As stated in point 7 of the January 2020 government statement. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Do I have a mover?
So Councillor Fiso.
Oh, Councillor Fiso. Oh, I can't see that. But Councillor Fiso, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to the staff. Just a quick question, and it's not vitally important, but I'm just curious. I'm referring to paragraph 26 about the procurement process. Is there a strong commitment to local contractors and within the region, I mean?
We have established a working party to look at the procurement process, and we haven't discussed a buy local mandate yet for that group, but I'll ensure that that's something that gets raised.
Yeah, if we've got someone who's got the capacity to do it, that is a question. It is a fairly bespoke piece of work, if you like, and given that every region in the country are doing these, it's probably reasonable to say that some of the big agencies are doing 3, 4, 5 of them, in which case you end up getting more bang for your buck. So I don't know whether this one's a possibility for buy local, but certainly if it is, that's my preference.
Thank you.
Councillor Radish.
Sorry. Yes. Is there any contradiction between that point 26 that Councillor Fiso pointed out and the fact that we've had several contracts lately let to out-of-town contractors, namely from Christchurch?
So this one's a little bit more challenging because it's procurement across a number of different TLAs. So we can't go in there and say this is Dunedin City Council's policy and this is what thou shalt use. We are trying to balance the procurement policies of 8 TLAs and regional authorities. And as Mr. Dyer said before, we will try and influence the outcome so that there is some buy local in it, but that buy local policy is only a recent change, and so it's just starting to work its way into the system and the new procurement now.
But also the buy local policy is only a Dunedin City Council change, and we're only one of all of the Otago Southland councils who are procuring this work.
Yes, but does it, what about in terms of buying this, the correct specification of pipe or consistency of material? You know, if you negotiate a good buy price for...
It's not part of this. So this is about doing a study to understand the different challenges that each council face to deliver water services, how much investment they need over the next 20, 30 years to meet increased standards that are coming from water reform, and then what are the pros and cons of the different delivery models, so that we can then come back to the community and councillors to say, you know, this is what the study, but it's not yet about the pipes we buy and the valves we install.
Right. Thank you.
I think that's the end of questions. Do I have a mover? Councillor Elder, seconder, Councillor Fiso. Do you want to speak to this, Councillor Elder?
I'm glad to see that the government is committing funding to this, given that it is driven by them. And I see the opportunities that we could have in working through a regional and southern approach. So I'm quite happy to endorse this in light of the government's requirements as well, and see the opportunities of perhaps working together and having cost sharing and being able to reduce the amount that we have to spend, because we can buy in bulk and things like that, and also sharing our knowledge. So I'm fully endorsing of this, but I am glad to see that, given it's a government directive, that they are also funding it. So thank you.
Any other speakers? I just want to comment quickly to say that this body of work, in my opinion, is very important because of this reform agenda that the government is going after. I am worried that to some extent the government may have already decided what it wants to do for its model, although that's not clear. And I'm deeply concerned, based on what came out in the newspaper around Wellington Water, that it appeared to be almost an attack on the Wellington water system by some other third party. And I'm very worried about who that third party might be. So I am glad that we are effectively arming ourselves with information, because when we're coming forward to debate this in the national debate, we will need to know exactly what we're talking about. I am always concerned about centralised funding and decision-making bodies. It does not serve us well when they're formed. My own personal opinion on water reform is that it's a good idea to standardise, it's a good idea to work out bulk buying capacity, it's a good idea to do all that stuff, but it's also very important to make sure that the control and the owning of the assets stays in the territorial authorities to some extent or another. We have not performed well whenever we've gone and given those assets away. We have the Waipori Fund, but we don't have the Waipori Dam. We have not really done that well under a CCO model when it comes to our electricity department compared to being a Department of Electricity. So it worries me going forward, especially when the term CCO comes up a lot in the model, that we may have to hand over our three waters to a CCO. And I also want to know, are they going to take it all? Or are we going to be left with the stormwater system and they're taking the freshwater system? So there's a lot of unknowns going forward here. And I think the only way for us to be a proper player in the political debate that's going to come forward is to have the information. And this report is the starting point. And I do believe, I find that working on the Regional Transport Committee with our colleagues in Southland and Otago is actually a really rewarding space. And I think we could do the same thing here on the three waters. Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I share your reservations about where this work might end up. But I think it's important to note that the government's reform agenda, such that it is, doesn't come from nowhere either. It comes as a response to historic poor performance in the infrastructure space by local government as a sector. And every time you get a Havelock North situation or a sewerage on the beaches in Auckland situation or a Clutha District Council situation, it isn't particularly easy to then make an argument that local authorities should be left in complete control over our water assets in particular, because it's very easy to kick the can down the road by doing what your ratepayers ask, i.e. keep rates as low as possible, and then the check has to be paid eventually, usually somewhat further down the line. So it is hard to argue that this isn't something that's worth looking at. I think it is certainly laudable that we are trying to control our destiny to some degree in terms of looking at how we might be able to cooperate regionally before something is done to us, and certainly am interested in where this goes. But there are all sorts of challenges here in terms of agreeing were these things to be decided regionally, agreeing on what policy might look like or what ambition might look like, let alone what funding models might look like and what form any cross-subsidisation might take, whereby effectively your larger metropolitan councils will be essentially asked to subsidise those in neighbouring districts who don't have the capacity to deliver this work in the same way that we do. So this is a big piece of work going on, not just here, but around the country. And the only thing, regardless of what its structure might eventually be, the only thing that gives me confidence really at this point is the very strong language that's being used around the assets being maintained in public ownership. We can argue about what the best governance arrangement for that asset management might be, but that is certainly a concern of mine, that they are retained in public ownership, whatever the operating and governance model might be, and entrenched in such a way that a change of political direction in Wellington doesn't then set us up for complete and wholesale privatisation of our water supply, which would be less than ideal. Thanks.
Any more speakers? Councillor Elder, you want to reply? Oh, Councillor Hall.
I'm okay.
Oh, Councillor Hall's put his hand up to speak.
I go back to the reform of the dairy industry. The dairy industry was reformed, the government took over, and they says nobody can make cheese in open vats anymore. So the dairy industry got to a situation where they all had to amalgamate to get a closed vats. Before the sign-off date, government says, oops, we've made a massive mistake. Our best cheese in the world is made in open vats. But all the cheese companies had merged and created the problem. We then go back to the Waipori. When we owned Waipori, government legislation came in to say that no local bodies or power company can own a generating plant. They have to have one or the other. And that forced us into the scenario of selling Waipori. I had a meeting the day before with then Councillor Hudson, Paul Hudson, and I explained this to him, that the government will change the rules before the implementation date. The next day they sold Waipori. Government then changed the legislation to say, oops, yes, you can own both. So we have to be very careful of what we agree to here, or what we ask for, because government changed their mind when they find it's not going to work, but then it's too late for us. So, you know, we need to look back on history before we say, hey, this is a great idea. It doesn't always work. Thank you.
Hey, Councillor Elder. Okay, that's said then, let's put it to the vote. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. You should never let me drive you on a long distance trip, because I won't stop for toilet breaks. It gets us to items for consideration for the chair. There have been none. I now call this meeting finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you. True. That's what I'm saying.